Okay, my memory card will only do 30 minutes at a time. I can keep the card in, but any event, laid on him by the words and power of God in what God calls his fire of refinement. I call it God's boot camp for prophets, because it's like a cadet becoming a Navy SEAL at a boot camp. You know, they're pretty tough on them. Or breaking a wild horse so that you can ride it. So all those words apply to me, but God doesn't tell you it's a fire of refinement, which you can find in Job, and I have, it's on video, in Job, Jonah, and Ezekiel, and now we find it 53, just not mentioned. That's why nobody can interpret 53. And these words were a snare for the Gentile, for the Christians, as it comes to be. Because they sound like words of sacrifice. Somebody dying for your sins. His sins are, by his wounds, what is it again? Well, anyway. And he did it for this reason. I mean, basically he creates, with 53, he basically created Christianity. He gave them something to hang their hat on from a biblical source that they now call the Old Testament. He did it because he knew a time was coming, such as the Holocaust. And he had to have America, a Gentile country, that knew his word to some extent. And they do. You know, they got the 10 Commandments anyway. There's not much to being a Christian. All you got to say is, I believe in Jesus and the resurrection. And that's it. You're done. And the Jews have 613 laws they got to abide by. That's too funny. So, that's the secret to 53. Oh, and he also knew he had set up one last day where he passes his wrath to them, and he tells me, we're going to take the cornerstones out of Christianity. It'll take a long time to completely fall. But by the end of my life, and the things that are going to occur in the building of the temple, Gentiles are going to have a hard time convincing their kids there ever was a Jesus. Especially when I get through with his big lies. Didn't I just say all that? The righteous servant, bearing up to and enduring this fire of refinement, of wounding, punishment, chastisement, crushing, bruising, maltreatment, removes the sickness and suffering of unrighteousness of the Jewish people for being guilty of not following the teachings, laws, commandments, and rules of God. Because why? They listen to my teachings. The righteous servant makes the many righteous. That's them. But I have to go, and God has to get me to... You're not born a prophet. You're not born the righteous servant. Okay? You got to be molded, just as the Jewish people were molded. God creates all things and all people. But he molds the Jewish people to be who they are, his chosen, with 613 laws, manner of dress. And he molds me, a Gentile, in the fire of refinement. And you could say the Jews have lived in a fire of refinement. They've suffered greatly. A lot of these words would apply to them. And rules of God and the feelings of guilt that come with that. The many and the multitude who heed my words and act accordingly will be healed of their sickness and suffering. We have counted him plagued, smitten, afflicted by God. Plague means to cause continual trouble or distress to, as in he has been plagued by ill health. Well, I've announced that. Smitten in biblical times meant struck, as with a severe hard blow. Afflicted means grievously affected or troubled, as by a disease or disfigurement at birth, as though cursed by God. I was born, and God says it was by his hand that it happened. Without my right breast, my right shoulder is shorter than the left, and my right arm is withered. Doesn't have hardly any muscle in it. It's real skinny. But it works just fine. I throw a baseball with it. And shoot baskets with it. I was born right-handed. I had to become left-handed to write and things like that. Chapter 53, verse 5. I swear I just read this. But he was wounded because of our sins, crushed because of our iniquities. He bore the chastisement that made us whole. These are where those words come from. I call the big six. And by his bruises we were healed. I don't even know what that means. The book of Ezekiel is the key to understand Isaiah 53. The purpose of Ezekiel was to be a prophet and teacher of righteousness to the exiles of the Assyrian Babylon, exiles of Assyria Babylon, by bringing them to repentance with restitution. To prepare him, God said, and this is basically the definition of the fire of refinement. I mean, this is where it comes from. I will make your face as hard as theirs. He's talking about the Jewish people. And your forehead as brazen as theirs. I will make your forehead like adamant, harder than flint. Do not fear them. Do not be dismayed by them. And then God maltreats and punishes him for the punishment of the houses of Israel and Judah, which would be for their sins. Wounded for their sins. Punished for it. Basically what he did is he says you're going to have a comparable amount of time, 340 or 60 days or something like that, pinned to the ground, crushed and bruised. I bet he got thrown down to the ground too. Oh, it's 430 days. He is punished, confined by the power of God to his house, removed from society, pinned to the ground, crushed and bruised, eating nothing but bread, and chastised by the words of God. Chapter 53, verse 6. We all went astray like sheep, each going his own way, and the Lord visited upon him the guilt of all of us. Now that's the end of verse 6, and that's where the quotation ends, right there. So these people, we were all astray like sheep, they're the same people who say, who can believe what we can believe? And that's the same people, the many who are made righteous to remove that guilt. That's what the story is. I mean, the guy's as lowly as these people, but somehow God selects him, puts him through this fire and prepares him to be a teacher, and God gives him all this knowledge. These new things that say, this is the man of God, that he said his spirit was going to alight upon. We all went astray like sheep. That's the Jewish people who are the witnesses. Okay, that was me ad-libbing. Here's God's words. We all went astray like sheep. That's Midrash, commentary. The Jewish people, who are the witnesses and the speakers of verses 1 through 6, stop following the laws of God in one manner or another. And the Lord visited upon him the guilt of all of us. Midrash, commentary. This would happen in the day of the Lord when God requires a man to be his visible representation and speak and write his words as Moses did. In the day of the Lord, a Gentile is tested by God, and upon passing the test, the man becomes his righteous servant, and his servant David, a shepherd who is Moshiach, Elijah, and the prophet like Moses. The test is, will he offer himself for guilt or refuse to? Well, I had just been told I had a month to live 8 years before that. So when God is talking to me, he's saying I might give you long life. I'm ready to roll the dice. It does say might. But you have to go through the fire of refinement. Now, mind you, he did that with me, but that's not what happened to Ezekiel. Ezekiel said a spirit that God is in, of course, seized me, and I went in the anger and the fury and bitterness of my spirit in the hand of God. Now, you figure being in the hand of God is not something to be furious and bitter about. No, that's the hand. They just grabbed him and said, fire of refinement for you. I want you to be a prophet to the exiles. Again, all that was set up. That was for the Gentiles and Christianity and America and the Holocaust. Because without America, you don't defeat Germany. You just don't. And of course, God knows all things from beginning to end. He accepts God's offer of possibly having long life after being crushed with disease in return of his offering of himself for guilt. The guilt of the Jewish people visited upon him. The guilt they have for sinning and emotion. People, that's not even a possibility. How can the guilt that Jewish people feel, if any, I don't know, the world hates them so much, a lot of them have kind of feel guilty because the world makes them feel guilty. But how can you transfer that to, for instance, me? All of them. I mean, what would it be? Would I go into the same guilt? Anyway, doesn't matter. They're going to be made righteous. And I got to step up on that too. The many made righteous, well, I've got a covenant with me of sin forgiveness. Everybody's going to be righteous at one time, except it's only for past sins. My teaching is, okay, you're sin-free. Those sins that you did that you don't think ever get taken care of at Yom Kippur, well, just get back to synagogue. Get back to study. Write Torah on your own heart. Learn everything you can because it's important for the Jewish heaven, which I'll explain some other time. It's very important. That's why it's the Jewish heaven. 53:7. He was maltreated, yet he was submissive. He did not open his mouth. I'm going to tell. He's hurting my neck. See, he gets me in the middle of these things, and he knows I want to finish them. He knows my personality, and I want to get it on YouTube. So he puts me to a situation where I'm like, that's it. I'm stopping if you don't quit there. And he won't quit it. He'll just make it worse. He says it's part of the fire of refinement, trying to show the people. It's him speaking through me, by the way, if you didn't catch that. I'm trying to shield the people. That didn't come from me. Oh, he can have words coming from me, and people, there's not one thought going through my cranium. I'm just speaking. I hear it. Total control. Which is funny. He once directed me to a segment of the radio show of Tovia Singer, who I really liked in the beginning and respected, and I guess I still like him, but let's just say the respect has diminished because of 53:10, or his 53 being Israel. Oh, in that radio segment, he says, I believe that God is going to have total and complete control of Moshiach. Well, he got something right, because he does. Not only all the things of the mind and the speech and everything, but my body is encased in what Ezekiel calls the cords of his power, the book of Ezekiel. To me, I'm just encased in it. It's not like cords or ropes or anything like that. I think that was written more for antiquity, so they could kind of understand what this power was. It's like ropes. But it just envelops me. He can spin me like a top if he wants to. And it's funny, the evolution of that, how he taught it to me, how I came to know about this power. I think it's in the book that he also dictated, My Life, to show how I fit all this lowly person with all these injuries and diseases and suffering. Okay, 53:7. He did not open his mouth. Okay, Midrash. He was maltreated, yet he was submissive. This verse can be identified in the book of Ezekiel. God maltreats him, not man. He pinned him to the ground for 430 days, for crying out loud. Made him leave society. Told him to go to his house. You shall not go out amongst the people. I bind you with the cords of my power. Maltreatment is a part of God's fire refinement to be made suitable for his purpose. With God, you are always submissive, or you will be slammed to the ground. Well, you become submissive anyway. It's taken about 7-8 times. And I'll be slammed to the ground on cement, bust your chin wide open, or crack your skull. Abrasions all over your face from your skin getting rubbed off. Wounded. How about this? You had me walking through a creek on stones, great big stones. And we had gotten through with one of these, I don't know, 50 yards of running on these stones. And some of them be slippery, but he'd make my feet stick. You know, it was all this big event to learn about him and his power. And out of nowhere, I was standing there wrestling next to a big boulder, and my hand goes up in the air, and I just basically look at it, and bam, slams down that rock and broke this bone right here. And he also tripped me when I was running one time on a railroad line. And anyway, I cracked a bunch of ribs that I had cracked before. Oh, I had also broken that bone before. Does that make it better? Ezekiel said the Spirit seized him, and he went in bitterness and the fury of his spirit in the hand of God. The chastisement, punishment, maltreatment, crushing, and bruising in God's final refinement is to remove the bitterness and furious nature of Ezekiel that Moses had too. I mean, the first time we sing just about how he kills a man in anger. Ezekiel furious. You can bet David was. Oh, he was a man of divine beings. There's not as much on him, and God has reasons for that. But you can find a lot of things on Moses, being a man of divine beings, including his radiant face. Hoshi, his attendant. It is to make a man meek and humble. They say at the end of Moses' life, he's the most humble man on earth. I think God kept him in the refinement for 40 years. Well, I've been in it 16. It also makes him hard as adamant, like flint, to deal with the Jews who will not listen to him. No, God says, see, you need more work. But to his house, Moses was called the most humble man on earth at the end of his life. God had him for 40 years. I stole your punchline. He did not open his mouth. Like Ezekiel, God will take the righteous servant from society. Isaiah 50, it says, he was cut off from the land of the living. Okay, cut off means you can't get to it. It doesn't mean death. And confine him to his house for God's fire of refinement, not allowed to go out among the people, silent as a lamb. Wasn't talking to anybody, to all that know him. 53 verse 8. By oppressive judgment he was taken away. who could describe his abode? For he was cut off from the land of the living through the sin of my people, who deserved the punishment. More stuff for the Christians. By oppressive judgment he was taken away. Midrash. Commentary. The oppressive judgment is being guilty and receiving a sentence of imprisonment and of wounding, maltreatment, chastisement, punishment, bruising, and crushing until suitable for God's purpose. A purpose that includes making the many righteous. God is using the verses symbolically, with the offering for guilt being shown as a guilty plea before a judge of crimes not committed by the defendant. You know, Jesus was found not guilty. But the fellow asked the crowd, I don't remember his name. I would know the name. He took it from me to embarrass me. He asked the multitude that had gathered, what do you want me to do with him? I want to wash my hands of this whole religious fiasco. And they said, crucify him. Nice crowd, huh? I feel like that's the crowd watching me. Who can describe his abode? But that doesn't work. Okay, the prison. And the Spirit entered into me and set me upon my feet. And he spoke to me and said to me, go, shut yourself up in your house. And we said to me, go to your room. That's it. I didn't even have the cords of my power on. I really didn't have a lot of people I knew at the time. There's a long story behind that. The chains. If you're in prison, you'd have chains on. As for you, all mortal cords have been placed upon you, and you have been bound with them, and you shall not go out among them. All of Israel will be able to describe the abode of God's righteous servant in the day of the Lord because of social media and phones with cameras. An abode to be honored in Isaiah 11 because the righteous servant is Moshiach. For he was cut off. Oh, we don't have that in here? Jesus had an abode. Yeah, there's a verse where he's eating meat with friends in his house. I'd like to get somebody to describe that for me. Good luck. For he was cut off from the land of the living. Being cut off from something means you cannot have it or get to it. Cut off from the land of the living by a man given long life means cut off from society and the material things of the world, not death. Oh, he's taking everything from me. I don't have anything. Even I had a triathlon bike. He trashed. I mean, he had my wallet fall out of my pants, and you can't tell me he didn't know. He didn't stop me and pick it up. There went my driver's license. No wallet, no bank account, no anything, no car. I walk everywhere. You think the Jewish people walked a lot in the Exodus? That's nothing compared to what I've walked. A pittance. I walk everywhere. Ezekiel was cut off from the land of the living, bound by God's power in his house as he went through a process of refinement, make him tough, make his forehead like adamant. And let him know and control and change his emotions so he's not in fear and dismay. I mean, you can be tough and still have fear and dismay. And he didn't want me to be. And I know he can do it too, by the way. I've been with him too long. He's shown me too many things. It's going to be much more enjoyable than being in the fire, which he says he's not stopping until we get to Israel. So I plead to the masses. Get me to Israel. I'll pay you back. Yeah, I don't have anything. You got a little Social Security coming in. The process of refinement of his emotions and self to be made suitable for God's purpose of his being a prophet to the Assyrian Babylon exiles. Midrash, through the sin of my people, the people of Isaiah, who are the Jewish people, the people in the first 6 verses, who deserve the punishment. Ezekiel suffers the punishment of the houses of Israel and Judah for 430 days. The houses of Judah and Israel suffered their punishment in exile. There was no vicarious suffering for the sins of the house of Judah and Israel. Ezekiel's punishment corresponded to the punishment of the houses of Israel and Judah for their sins. Isaiah 53 verse 9. And his grave was set among the wicked, and with the rich in his death. Though he had done no injustice, he had spoken no falsehood. I haven't spoken a falsehood since God talked to me. That's as far as I'm going to go with that. This verse says the righteous servant of God was poor but dies a rich man. The righteous servant of God becomes poor when God cuts him off from the world, and then he is given the many as his portion and receives the multitude as his spoil, and his abode will be honored. He will die a rich man. But the Lord chose to crush him by disease. This is 53:10, which we have covered. I understand. It could be the first time for somebody on 53. But the Lord chose, 53 verse 10, but the Lord chose to crush him by disease, that if he made himself an offering for guilt, and that's precisely what it says, Toby is saying, it does not say that he became a guilt offering. Okay? It doesn't say that. Why would he do that? He's got to know. He's too fluent in Hebrew. I don't believe that. He might see offspring and have long life, and that through him the Lord's purpose might prosper. But that purpose is not stated. But we know in Malachi 3, he says, I'm returning to my temple. There's a day of the Lord. I got things to do. There's his purpose. But the Lord chose to crush him by disease. Midrash. Commentary. God's righteous servant will be familiar with disease and his life crushed because of disease that he is afflicted with by the power of God. Now, he takes full credit for it. Now, I had skin cancer much earlier than what we're talking about here, being crushed. I think the colon cancer crushed me. But the true crush came when I went through the surgery and chemo and the colon cancer was removed. But further tests showed that it had spread to my lungs, stage 4. And they gave me approximately, about a month to live and untreatable. Okay, it was 22 years ago when the planes hit New York. That's how long ago it was. So, long life. Long life after being crushed with disease. But it was the colon cancer, which I was about 43. He didn't speak to me until I was 50. And the lung cancer. I just quit working. I just walked every day. I didn't really think I was going to die, primarily because I didn't suffer from the symptoms of the lung cancer like I did the colon cancer. I felt all of that. It had burst through my colon. I was bleeding internally. I couldn't even get a proper diagnosis of it for months, 2.5 months of solid pain. Here I am back in the pain box again. But anyway, that was the Holy Spirit. He said something funny. But the Lord chose to crush him by disease. But anyway, familiar with disease would be the skin cancer. That if he made himself an offering for guilt. It's an offer. It's an offering of oneself to God to remove the guilt of sinning of the Jewish people in the first 6 verses, to make them righteous. But I got to go through the fire of refinement. That's